Mass migration into a country is disadvantageous to the host citizens.
Okay, so the reason that I disagreed is because just based off research and seeing what happens in other countries and things like that, we don't have a lot of data here. So you can't tell for sure how it benefits us as yet, or you can't do your own empirical research, for me at least, because of our lack of data. So what I did is that, just based off reading and researching into other countries, there's a significant contribution that mass migration into a country can actually have towards a country's GDP. Yeah, I acknowledge that there are things like cultural clashes and these things, but I think when it really boils down to it, mass migration, if managed effectively, could do more good than harm. For example, it can increase your productivity levels through the labor force market mechanism and all these things in terms of contributing to growth.
For me, why I say neutral about it, because it depends on the circumstances of the country, it depends on the macroeconomic status of the country, and I feel as though a free movement of people is something that we all wish that we can have, and especially with globalization, that is something that we speak about a lot. But in terms of mass migration, I really do think it depends. Of course, there are always benefits, but I think especially when you look at countries that are in war, especially mass migration could actually work against those who migrate and to the host country as well. So it really does depend on the circumstances of the country.
I also think it depends on the extent to which you like. I also think it depends on how much migrants comes to a country, because you don't want a case where your labor to capital ratio is overwhelmed by a migration crisis. So I think it would only become disadvantageous in such instances. But if you don't have enough data and you are not sure of how many migrants are here, then you can't really determine what is their actual impact on the existing population.
Me personally, while it is, yes, I understand that we don't have a lot of immigrant data available, yes, the benefit of it depends a lot on the circumstances at current time. I do think that similar to Lena, you can use empirical work to see whether or not immigrants will be beneficial. So a lot of data would suggest, yes, they can be very beneficial towards the economy, but at the same time, it depends, just like what Ruqayyah said. It depends on the initiative of that country to make use of the migrant labor. Also depends on the culture of the country itself as well, and that is pretty much it. Because if it is you have like a government in charge that is proactive on including migrant workers in a place where they can be beneficial, yes, you can definitely see that there'll be a lot of good that will come from it. But with the circumstances situation put into play, you can have something where you use migrants kind of like a political game, so to say. Right. So, yeah.
Trinidad and Tobago should allow immigrants into their borders and see it as a duty.
Okay, so for me, when I hear into our borders, I'm referring to the physicality of it actually into our borders. I don't agree with turning people away at the sea and at the airplane, of course, unless they're a threat to Trinidad and Tobago. But I think when we're talking about migration, we forget that there are different classifications when we talk about asylum seekers, refugees, migrants, etc. And I feel as though it's our duty as a Trinidadian government to at least be able to vet the process properly when persons come into the country, and then we can take a decision. If it is we realize that this person is safe to go back to their home country, then we could engage in that. However, I still feel as though we should do due diligence in that initial process, that when people come in, we do the right thing by examining their situation, their circumstances, and everything that goes on in that process to ensure how we move further. So I definitely think in that initial stage, we should be open. We should not be turning boats back in the middle of the ocean and stuff like that. I think those are violations against human rights, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree. I really do think that we should treat migrants as a case-by-case basis. Because the fact of the matter is, if we as a country do suffer some certain unforeseen economic crisis or humanitarian crisis, we would be migrants as well, and we would hope that a country is kind enough to take our nationals into their borders.
Yes, I understand both of you guys' point of view. I really do agree with Ruqayyah's view where you don't turn them away at sea. That is just wrong in every sense and fashion to essentially send them back to their debts. You know? You take them in, do due diligence, and send them back if you have to. But I am of the view that if it is your country currently cannot take care of its own citizens and is struggling, then you're currently in no state to take in any additional or true immigrants.
Yeah.
And to me, it would be wrong, so to say, because now you're putting strains not just on the immigrants, but on your own citizens who already cannot get things within their own borders.
Yeah, for me, when I heard if we should take this as a duty to allow them into our borders, I wasn't thinking in the sense of, or take it like a case by case. I interpret it in the sense that we were embracing these people and telling them, hey, you can come, you can reside here, and go through the whole process. And to me, I agree with Dietrich. If you can't, especially in a country that's facing so much economic downturn, and given that you already are struggling to stay afloat, I don't think that, given that entire circumstance, that you should be taken in more straight, seeing that you can't take care of your own people.
And one more thing is that a lot of criticism that we see from people who are not in our country currently, they're speaking from an outside perspective. So they will speak based on what they know in their country. They don't know the inside perspective of what goes on currently in Trinidad and Tobago. And it's unfair to a nation to basically say, you should do this because things might be fine.
Right.
Trinidad and Tobago has the financial capacity to accommodate the influx of Venezuelans.
For me, this all comes back to the previous question where I said how if you have no capacity to take migrants, you shouldn't take migrants. Because currently in Trinidad and Tobago, I believe we are in a 4 or 5 year recession because the numbers in 2018 were revised downwards.
Yeah.
Which means they show that our economic climate as is not in a good position. And you can see that every single day when you go outside, when you look at public services, the struggles that there are. So that is my reasoning for my answer.
And for me, what I observed too is that with this whole situation, I haven't seen our government really take on any sort of initiative to get that foreign aid to actually say, well, hey, okay, we can afford to help out in this way. And that to me is, if we cannot afford to take in migrants on our budget right now, we have been dipping into the HSF like crazy just to keep our public sector afloat. We are not in any sustainable position right now to be taking in extra citizens or anything like that.
And I think the difficulty too with having migrants is that while there are some migrants who come here to obviously seek refuge for their economic position, there are some Venezuelans who I think may be well off, who are coming here and they're coming for a better life and a more comfortable life, not necessarily out of necessity than maybe the average Venezuelan, and they're not necessarily contributing to our taxes, but are still accessing our healthcare, still accessing our public services. I think they should still have access to certain utilities. To what extent?
Right. Well, for me, I think it's clear that Trinidad and Tobago has been in an economic crisis for quite some time, and there's not much that we can do, right now. So I feel that would just simply extend to the migrant situation. However, I do not feel that it's far-fetched. I think eventually we can get to a point where we can assist, and assist in a way that's meaningful. Because right now you have migrant children from Venezuela and other countries as well who would come in and they can't even go to school, right? And they would have to go to like NGOs or, for example, like the Catholic Church, for example, to be able to access, private tuition, and that is being funded by, private companies such as UNICEF and that sort of thing. So what we need to do is it's just for us to build our economy more so that eventually we'll be able to take that burden off of the private sector and stuff like that. But yeah, I guess we're all simply on the same page where right now we just don't have the financial capacity to facilitate that kind of thing.
The Venezuelan migrants should get priority over other migrants given their economic situation.
So I decided to stay neutral on this simply because of one, you need data in terms of the migrants that we have coming in from different parts of the world. You know, there's a big misconception that Trinidad and Tobago only has migrants from Venezuela. We have migrants from other Hispanic countries. We have migrants from Africa, from India, you know, from the Middle East, right? These countries where people are coming from have such varied issues, right? One person could come from India and they might be, you know, fleeing religious persecution, right? Versus somebody else who might just be coming for a better life. So I think it's a case-by-case basis again. However, I feel as though given the urgency of Venezuela, given that it's right next door, and our relationship with Venezuela, of course, I see the urgency to prioritize, but I don't think that we should put any one issue above another because religious persecution, political persecution, economic crisis in Venezuela is economic crisis anywhere else in the world. So we really do need to take it by case basis, in my opinion.
Okay, well I totally agree, but the reason I was standing on the agree line, I didn't really think about it fully from your perspective.
Right.
But what I would say is that because of the fact that it is a clear-cut humanitarian crisis, and we see the extent to which it's affecting people, and we see how many people are being affected, we can say that it's more likely to be applicable, and it would be easier to treat the Venezuelans a certain way because you know for sure that they're coming with valid claims. Well, the assumption would be that anyway, until you can treat it on a case-by-case basis.
Right.
So I think that would be the most efficient thing to do at this point in time, while sorting through the existing migrants, or all the migrants.
Me personally, I disagree with it because I understand the fact that Venezuela is right next door to us. I do understand that's where a lot of people approach will come to. But to me, is that yes, just because they're next door doesn't mean that they should get priority over any other immigrant. At the end of the day, an immigrant is an immigrant. You know, just like any other immigrant, you are one and the same. Not to be a bad generalization, but that's just the view of it. Like you mentioned, different types of immigrants you could have. So let's say someone from India, we know how bad gender violence is there. Let's say a woman left there because of gender violence that she faced, and she came here thinking she would have a much better life.
Yeah.
Would you then say that because Venezuela's economic climate is the way it is, that someone who has been sexually abused should be turned down in favor?
Yeah.
And that's where I stand at it. Like.
Trinidad and Tobago's labor market is at maximum capacity.
Well, in Trinidad, we know for a fact that there is a lot of excess room. Like in manufacturing, I believe not last year, but the year before, we saw it had a large percentage of 33.3% excess capacity in there. We know our agricultural sector needs some growth, and to know to facilitate that, you would need labor. So that is where I think Venezuelan migrants, or any migrants, so to say, can be utilized. Like we have excess capacity within our economy, and it's sad to say, but Venezuelan migrants who cannot speak English as a second language are essentially unskilled labor in our economy, given our system. So with that being said, the sectors which can grow from them could see great benefit, like the manufacturing and agricultural sector, in like that transitioning period of them entering the country.
Yeah, I think as well, what we can see or what we observe happening is that Venezuelans tend to go into those jobs that Trinidadians don't really seek. And I think I read it in an article recently too. So for me, it's like we have the excess capacity to absorb them in the sense that you said, like highly unskilled laborers, to grow like our manufacturing, agriculture sector, and all those non-energy sectors, and to also have them in such a way that they don't displace any residents because they're not doing that, and to also contribute to our growth and development of the economy.
Yeah, I definitely think we have excess capacity, not just in manufacturing and agriculture, but because when we talk about education, we talk about the labor market, the fact is that there is room, right? But it's just about how it is we allocate labor in the labor market now, in terms of meeting the developmental needs of Trinidad and Tobago, because that is the goal at the end of the day. But do we have excess labor? Well, capacity in our labor market for sure.
Trinidad and Tobago has a culture of xenophobia.
So I think that we do have a culture of xenophobia in Trinidad and Tobago, for example, and we see it even in our culture with the songs that we sing about persons who come to Trinidad and Tobago. For example, look at how sometimes we make jokes about persons from Guyana, persons from Jamaica. We make fun of their accents and their culture. And now with the Venezuelan migrants, we see it on an escalated scale, right? We see socially men positive comments at Venezuelan women just because, and women also saying, get out of our country, go back from where you come from. I think this is something that Trinidad has been grappling with for some time, because we seem to be having I mean, I understand the fear when you see persons come into your country that you weren't there before, so you start to worry about your job security, about your safety, but at the same time, we have to remember that we all came to the Caribbean at some point in time, so no one, besides the indigenous people, none of us own Trinidad and Tobago, and in that case, I think we definitely have developed a culture of xenophobia over the years, and it's detrimental on a societal level for sure.
Yeah, I think xenophobia is one of the very few problems that immigrants actually face when they come into here. And I was reading and I saw the UN has documented so many cases of xenophobia, even in the formal workplace. Yeah. And that can be really, really, it can have a lot of impacts, not only on us, but on the immigrants themselves. And you see xenophobia every day. You see it in the unfortunate circumstances of like a Venezuelan woman being murdered, being kidnapped. You go through social media and you see these mean comments, and it's like I don't understand like where the culture. I understand where the culture comes from, but I can't grapple with the fact that as you said, like we don't belong here. We all came here at one point in time.
Yeah, persons outright having social movements against Venezuelans being here without any legitimate basis, without solidly justifying what their fears are and articulating it in a very professional manner. Instead, they take to social media, instead they take to the streets, not understanding that this has implications, this reflects badly on our society, and this shows that we are not an accepting culture, when in fact a lot of Trinidadians are migrants all over the world. Yeah. And persons can be xenophobic towards us as well. Yeah.
Our culture xenophobia comes, like Ruqayyah said, from our songs as a big factor, but it also comes from our natural resource endowment.
Yeah.
Since we were endowed with really good energy sectors, the eye of the region, everyone was basically looking at us as the leader in the region. I believe we are the biggest leader in CARICOM. We're the biggest economy in the Caribbean. And those things got to everyone's head when it comes now to doing our things, because Venezuelans aren't the only people who Trinidadians poke fun of or make or have mean comments against. They make fun and say all sorts of things about our own region, and which is why a lot of different countries' citizens, they don't really like Trinidadians much. Well, that might be harsh, but it is very valid, because we make fun of like St. Lucians, of St. Vincent, all them, because they are not as developed as us. And again, it has a harmful effect on us, especially when we come from a country which whose national anthem says every creed and race finds an equal place, when in reality it's the complete opposite for us.
Yeah.
But I think it's just because we're so territorial as a nation.
Yeah.
And I think that has a lot to do with it. We just, for some reason, feel threatened by every
By any,
by
any,
any
yeah.
everything.
But what I will say though, one thing that Trinidadians forget is that we have very large diaspora, you know, in America, Canada, Europe, and other parts of the world as well. And you know, just extending the conversation to other Caribbean regions as well. There are some diasporas that make up almost like 50% as much as the actual population of the country, right? So you have hundreds of thousands of people living abroad. And how can we be xenophobic because we wouldn't want our family members? Because I'm sure all of us know somebody, a relative who lives abroad.
Yeah.
We wouldn't like them to experience that same thing. And in fact, a lot of Trinidadians go abroad and they have to do the same jobs that other migrants come to Trinidad to do as well. So we really need to check ourselves. You know, there's a Caribbean saying that monkey doesn't see the old tail, and I feel like we have to get away from that culture because we won't like anybody to that's a solution to that to anybody else.
Yeah.